Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The Prime Minister is pushing on with her Brexit plan at the start of what is one of the most crucial weeks in her premiership. This morning, Theresa May addressed business leaders as she tried to win their backing for the deal. She told them there was no room for negotiation on the terms of the draft withdrawal agreement with the EU. But it comes against a backdrop of turbulence and dissent, with some Tory MPs pressing for changes to be made. And threats of a leadership challenge remain. With more, here's our political editor Laura Kuensberg. Her report contains flash photography.
Lights, camera, maybe not much action.
That treaty, the details, protocols.
Fears about Theresa May's deal are still the talk of Westminster's town, but she's ploughing on.
Please join me in giving the Prime Minister a big CBI welcome.
Taking her deal, her pitch, today to the platform.
It was never going to be easy or straightforward, and the final stage was always going to be the toughest. But we have in view a deal that will work for the UK, and let no one be in any doubt, I am determined to deliver it.
Was that applause or relief? Business clearly comforted that the government has reached a compromise with Brussels on how we leave the EU.
I think you've done an incredible job, and let's just get over the final line.
Not everyone's agreed the script, though. There are deep worries here and with MPs that she's signed up to too close a relationship with the European Union.
So could I ask you to think again about the economics of the whole thing, rather than listening to the petitions of the CBI, which is really the Confederation of European Industry?
I think the portrayal that you have given of what has been agreed is a little inaccurate in its position.
Why should our viewers and listeners believe you that you have struck the right deal when so many of your own colleagues believe it is an intolerable compromise, and some of them hate it so much they're trying to force you out along with the deal?
Don't just listen to the politicians. Listen to what business is saying. Listen to what business that is providing your jobs and ensuring that you have that income that puts food on the table for your family is saying.
But that's a more comfortable audience than her own neighbourhood, where some MPs want her off the stage.
We can't put this off because it's inconvenient or emotionally difficult for us to wrestle with loyalty. It's time, and really the time is long past where we should be sitting on our hands.
Brexiteers can complain and carp. There are genuine concerns, but they need 48 Tory MPs to sign letters to push a vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister. And either Parliament's postman has gone on strike, or not enough of them are brave enough, at least not yet. A Brexiteer coup might not yet have arrived, but there's no chance Labour is coming to the Prime Minister's rescue.
Labour has always said that we respect the results of the referendum, but we cannot respect the shambolic way in which this government has bungled these vital negotiations.
But guess what? You might see pictures like this for longer than you think. The EU wants everyone to keep calm, very calm, but suggests there could be close ties in a transition period until the end of 2022.
This deal is fair and balanced. Now, more than ever, we must all remain calm, and I will remain calm, and keep our focus on the need for the UK to leave the EU in an orderly fashion.
Inside number 10, the plan is to settle the terms of our relationship with the EU by Sunday. But it's not just up to those in the inner sanctum. Theresa May might just want to hunker down, but there are still Brexiteers at the gates. Laura Kuensberg, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, business leaders at the CBI largely welcomed the Prime Minister's plans, although some have criticised her plans for immigration after Brexit, as our business editor Simon Jack reports.
Rex London sells over £6 million worth of gifts to EU customers every year, which is why company directors' main worry is leaving the single market without a deal, something they continue to plan for.
We certainly have to think about the worst. We won't stop thinking about that until a deal is confirmed. Really all we need is everyone to get around and hammer out a deal here one way or the other, because the worst thing that can happen is no one agrees and we crash out of the EU with no deal at all in a few months' time.
Big business largely agrees. Across town at the CBI's annual conference, delegates gave the Prime Minister's deal a reasonably warm welcome.
Thank you.
I think the choice in front of us as business people is that we have a deal on the table and we're being asked, can we support it? Can we invest as a result of it? Can we use this deal to plan for the future and make Britain a success? I think we can, and that's why I support it.
Of course, businesses, however big, cannot vote. But MPs can, which is why the President of the CBI, John Allen, urged them to consult with the businesses and firms in their constituencies before making up their mind how to vote when this deal gets to the Commons.
Whether free markets and...
The Prime Minister proudly told the audience she'd put an end to freedom of movement once and for all, and would make it harder to hire anyone from abroad making less than £30,000. If she thought that would go down well, she came to the wrong conference.
We have a real difference with government on immigration. They may be listening to business, but they're not hearing. It is reasonable to want to control immigration. Business understands that. But the idea of doing it in this way, which closes down access to workers where our construction businesses need them, our healthcare providers need them, would do real damage to our economy.
Business Secretary Greg Clark said the government had heard those concerns.
What we need to do when we set out the proposals in a white paper to come, but it'll be our white paper, is to make sure that we can allow public services and businesses to continue to count on that labour in the future. But it'll be our choice.
Back in West London, they're not taking any chances. This firm has already opened warehouses in the EU, and their contingency planning continues. Not all businesses support Mrs May's deal. A few would like the clean break of no deal. Others want a second referendum. All agree this deal is a long way from being delivered, with just 19 weeks till the date we leave. Simon Jack, BBC News.
In a moment, we'll get the latest from Laura Kuenssberg in Westminster. First, though, our Europe editor, Katja Adler, in Brussels. The Prime Minister is heading to Brussels later this week. How much support is there now across the EU for this deal?
Well, Sophie, you know, there is a broad support, absolutely, despite what's going on politically in the UK. The EU, because the Cabinet last week approved the draft text of the withdrawal agreement, is ploughing ahead with plans for a special Seal the Deal Brexit summit here in Brussels on Sunday. And the EU's chief Brexit negotiator, Michel Barnier, was absolutely in step with the Prime Minister today. He echoed that successful slogan of the Leave campaign about taking back control by saying today this Brexit deal will allow the UK to take back control. He predicted also that after Brexit there would be a special economic and strategic partnership between the UK and EU. But, Sophie, there are storm clouds here in the EU as well over the text of this Brexit deal, that they're not as threatening and menacing as they are in the UK. For example, Spain today complained that the text of the withdrawal agreement doesn't make it legally clear that EU-UK negotiations do not automatically apply to Gibraltar. Now, it's unlikely to try and veto the text, but it is looking for written clarification. Whereas when it comes to that ambitious future declaration of the partnership after Brexit between the EU and the UK, EU powerhouses France and Germany are insisting that the text makes it perfectly clear for the UK that once it is outside the single market, the advantages can't be the same or as good as on the inside.
And Laura Kuenssberg, the Prime Minister is certainly pushing on with her plan, but what about these threats to her leadership? How serious are they looking tonight?
Well, Sophie, the threats are still there. There's no way that Downing Street can somehow just ignore it, wave a magic wand and wait for them all to go away. But in terms of whether or not Brexiteers who want to force her out have reached their magic number of the 48 that would be required to force a contest, they are still waiting, still counting hypothetically who says they've submitted a letter. Are they all telling the truth? And the longer we wait, well, the longer it seems like they might be crying wolf. And certainly the view right in the heart of government is that the important thing to do is to ignore the noise, to push on. Theresa May can never have thought that her compromise deal with the European Union would be popular. The question will come in a few weeks' time as to whether enough MPs are willing to hold their nose. But things are not about to change for Theresa May, even if the threat of a sudden vote to force a leadership contest goes away. Since the general election, Sophie, she's almost had to fight through every single day. and that's not going to change.
Laura in Westminster, Katia in Brussels. Thank you both.
Theresa May defended her controversial Brexit deal to business leaders today, telling them jobs depend on getting it right. The Prime Minister told the CBI conference her plans put Britain's economic success first. It's the start of a crucial week for Mrs May, with her plans set to be finalised at an EU summit this weekend. Cabinet ministers gave her their support today, but backbenchers and other parties are demanding late changes to that deal. And Mrs May could yet face a challenge to her leadership, as our political correspondent Romilly Weeks reports from Westminster.
Her deal might have landed with a whimper in Westminster, but addressing an audience of business leaders desperate for certainty, the Prime Minister finally had an easier reception.
We're not talking about political theory, but the reality of people's lives and livelihoods. Jobs depend on us getting this right. And what we have agreed unashamedly puts our future economic success and the livelihoods of working families up and down this country first.
There was support for that pragmatism here. Politically, though, she's still fighting fires on every front.
What do you say to those in your cabinet who want you to go back to the EU and ask for a better deal? And how many ministers can you afford to lose before your position becomes untenable and intolerable?
The withdrawal agreement was agreed on the basis that it would only finally be agreed alongside a future relationship. Nothing is agreed until everything is agreed, and we're working hard over these remaining days to ensure that we get that future relationship right.
Will that be enough to persuade the wobbling members of her cabinet?
I think the Prime Minister is doing a very good job, and I think it's important that people do give the Prime Minister all the support they can in order to ensure that she concludes a deal that's in the best interests of Britain.
Mr Gove was professing loyalty, but others made no secret they're pushing for significant changes.
I think that the UK cannot be trapped in a permanent customs arrangement, and I think that it's really important that we get some sort of clarity and some improvement on that.
And this was Penny Mordaunt's less than ringing endorsement.
I'll be working with the whole of the Cabinet to get the best deal possible for the United Kingdom.
Have you come to change your mind, gentlemen?
Other Eurosceptic backbenchers trooped into Downing Street to appeal to her directly to change course, and left without saying whether they'd been persuaded not to join those plotting the Prime Minister's downfall. Those who've already demanded a vote of no confidence now looking like they might not get the numbers.
I think we will make it. I mean, the truth of the matter is that, you know, the question of timing, if you like, is secondary to the fact that almost certainly at some point there will be a challenge. I hope it will be as soon as possible so we can clear the air and get on with, you know, all the other stuff which is really important.
Flowers were delivered to the Prime Minister this evening. You can see why sympathisers might feel she needs them. Romilly Weeks, ITV News.
Well, in Brussels, the EU's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, called for both sides to remain calm and focused on finalising details of their future relationship. He said the deal would give the UK full control of its laws. But in an indication of the complex task ahead, Spain has threatened to reject the deal over the issue of Gibraltar. From Brussels, here's Angus Walker.
The EU's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, met ministers from the 27 other member states today to get their blessing on the agreement he's reached. Aware of the political turmoil in the UK, he later sounded as though he was trying to help Theresa May sell the deal, even borrowing the language of Brexit.
Both the EU and the UK will have full control of their own legislation and rule-making. It's essential for the UK in terms of taking back control.
But for the EU, the danger of this deal being rejected by British MPs is the elephant in the room.
Mr Barnier, is there a plan B?
We're focused on plan A, he told me. And there's no appetite to renegotiate.
I'm sure that we are now at the end of the process, so I'm hoping that it will be possible also in London to go further.
This is the best you'll get.
It's the best after so many months of negotiations.
The EU itself is not as united behind the Brexit deal as senior officials would like to make out. Today, Spain insisted on last-minute changes to the withdrawal agreement to reflect its concerns over Gibraltar. A reminder that this deal is not quite done and dusted. And British ministers are keen to point out that talks on a future trade deal are still going on.
The Prime Minister's made it clear that the withdrawal agreement is done, but there's discussion to be had on the framework agreement.
But there's little room for manoeuvre. If Theresa May survives the week, a special summit scheduled for Sunday will see EU heads of state seal the deal and perhaps the Prime Minister's fate. Angus Walker, ITV News, Brussels.
OK, well, let's return to Westminster now and our political editor, Robert Peston. So, Robert, we seem to say this every week, don't we? But it's another big week for the Prime Minister and her Brexit plans. But is she going to have, do you think, the added problem of a leadership challenge?
Well, to coin a phrase, the rebellion has been postponed, but definitely not cancelled. The reason it's been put on hold for a day or two is because Ian Duncan Smith, Owen Paterson, a couple of influential Brexit Tory MPs went in to see the Prime Minister. They made the demand that she must switch away from her sort of softish Brexit towards their idea of a free trade agreement, and also not have this controversial Northern Ireland backstop, which they think locks us into what they call a sort of state of vassalage, essentially taking rules from the EU. They want a technological solution to keep the border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland open, and they think they got a good hearing. They emerged slightly chipper. Now, actually, when they've gone back to talk to their Brexiter colleagues have said the chances of the Prime Minister actually, at this stage, radically changing her Brexit are about as likely, I would say, as me being elected Pope anytime soon. So I do think that they will have another go at putting together those numbers to force the no confidence vote in the next day or two. But the longer this thing drags on, I think the harder it is to be confident she will indeed face the challenge now. But I do think sometime in the next few weeks there will be a challenge to her leadership.
OK, Robert Peston as Pope, there's a thought. Thank you from Westminster.
Be in no doubt I am determined to deliver my Brexit deal, Theresa May has told business leaders at the CBI conference. As of this evening, opponents of that deal on her own backbenches have still failed to muster enough support to start the process of ejecting her from Downing Street. And there was enthusiasm for leaving Europe from Jeremy Corbyn, who claimed Labour could negotiate an exit that would be a catalyst for economic transformation. Here's our political editor, Gary Gibbon.
As the plot to depose her spluttered on, Theresa May carried on selling her Brexit deal to business today, hoping they will help her push out the message.
It was never going to be easy or straightforward, and the final stage was always going to be the toughest. But we have in view a deal that will work for the UK, and let no one be in any doubt, I am determined to deliver it.
Theresa May touched on another imminent phase in the selling of the deal, the prospect of a new immigration policy when freedom of movement for EU citizens ends.
It will no longer be the case that EU nationals, regardless of the skills or experience they have to offer, can jump the queue ahead of engineers from Sydney or software developers from Delhi.
The Belgian MEP Guy Verhofstadt, who runs the European Parliament Brexit Committee, tweeted, EU citizens living, working, contributing to UK communities didn't jump the queue. They were exercising their rights.
Thank you.
Number 10 insisted the Prime Minister wasn't denigrating EU citizens, but she was clearly hoping grabby language would cut through a sense that Brexit would change things.
What's your meeting about, Mr. Patterson?
A delegation of Brexiteers told the Prime Minister this afternoon to switch tack to their approach and claimed their ideas got a good hearing. Fighting on many fronts this week, Theresa May knows that many EU ministers meeting in Brussels want to stop her getting any major changes in the deal in talks this week.
Well, we hope that we will not have to reopen the negotiations. We hope that the text will be acceptable today for the EU27 and in the next days also clearly for the British side. And so we hope that the text will not be opened excessively.
Some, though, here are trying to get rewrites of their own. The Spanish Foreign Minister wanting a last-minute change on the treatment of Gibraltar. The EU chief negotiator called for steady nerves.
Now, more than ever, we must all remain calm and I will remain calm and keep our focus on the need for the UK to leave the EU in an orderly fashion.
Back in Westminster, those who led the call for a vote of no confidence in Theresa May are sounding frustrated with colleagues who hadn't put in the 48 letters necessary to trigger that vote.
We've had a lot of talk, frankly, from people who are very unhappy about this deal, and at some stage we actually have to decide it's time to act.
You're getting a bit frustrated with some of your colleagues, aren't you? Not stepping up to the wire as you see it.
Well, I think if people have said they're going to act, and people have, expressed the same frustrations that I feel about this deal, and I appreciate, this is difficult for everyone, but actually I do think it's incumbent on people to actually now step up to the plate.
Some of your colleagues are looking over their shoulders saying, where's the rest of the army? I thought we were all marching together with these 48 letters. Are you coming under pressure from them, under pressure from the whips? Maybe from your association, all pulling in different directions at the moment?
Interestingly, not really. My association have been quite vocal this weekend. To my surprise, relatively in support of Jacob in large numbers.
And they'd like you to put the letter in.
Well, I think they feel very frustrated that the Brexit voices feel lost in the Prime Minister's language a lot of the time. She's saying one thing, but the document doesn't really reflect that. But as I've said to them, and I would say to anyone else, this is my decision as the representative, it's my call, and I will do what I think is right at the right time.
But we could watch this space. Your call might come a bit later than some of the others, but go in the same direction.
Well, it might, but I won't tell you even if I do, because I think it's a private matter.
I don't think it's played very well. I think that if you're going to do this, do it elegantly, put your letters in quietly, make your feelings known. But to make a circus out of it, to almost do it with glee, I think is a strange way of trying to impress the nation that we're doing the right things for the right reasons. So I can understand people feel strongly about him, but I say it just makes us look like hyenas.
Back at the CBI conference, the Labour leader insisted he can't come to the rescue of Theresa May's deal.
Our votes in Parliament will be to attempt to stop this deal and say to the government, you've got to go back and negotiate something else. There is time to do it.
And that means the Prime Minister is still nowhere near the vote she needs to get her deal through Parliament. The central challenge, which has now spawned a Tory uprising, but not yet toppled her.
Our political editor, Gary Gibbon. Well, as Theresa May battles it out in Westminster, the country's biggest business lobby, the CBI, has come out in support of her Brexit agreement, saying it might not be perfect, but it is the only deal that gives them the chance of maintaining the status quo. Our business editor, Siobhan Kennedy, has been down to the CBI conference to find out more.
Yes or no, do you back Theresa May?
I do, yes.
Yes or no, if I may, do you back Theresa May?
Yes.
May I ask, do you back Theresa May? Yes, I do. That's certainly what she wants to hear. A rare moment of sunshine as the Prime Minister faces the toughest moment of her political career. It's business that ironically may come to her rescue.
Theresa May and business have never been the warmest of bedfellows, but ironically now with her political life on the line, it's these men and women in suits all around me that she's turning to lend their weight to her deal. Imperfect as many of them see that it is. It's better than a no deal, or the worst case scenario as many of them see it, a Labour government led by Jeremy Corbyn.
The truth is that if we have a no deal Brexit, the consequences for the British economy, for people's jobs, for public services would be devastating. So we absolutely cannot allow that to happen.
And is that why business is rallying around Theresa May today? Even though you think it's imperfect, it's better than the worst case scenario, no deal or a Labour government.
I think that absolutely sums it up. It's better than no deal, and it's better than a Corbyn government that would take us back to the 70s.
A year ago, business leaders like John Neal gathered here were sceptical of the PM's promise to deliver a transition period that prioritised them. A year on, Theresa May's done just that. Now she believes it's payback time.
It's not just a job for politicians. All of you must play your part too, by stepping up to demonstrate that you truly have a stake in the success of this country.
One man wasn't buying it, though.
So could I ask you to think again about the economics of the whole thing, rather than listening to the petitions of the CBI, which is really the Confederation of European Industry?
I think the portrayal that you have given of what has been agreed is a little inaccurate in its position.
This pro-Brexit businessman may have been given short shrift, But outside, he wasn't repentant.
Well,
she says it's the best deal she can possibly get. Do you
well,
not believe her?
No, I don't. No, absolutely not.
And others too were still not convinced by Theresa May, despite her upbeat pitch. Do you back Theresa May?
No, I'm afraid I don't.
At the moment, yes. I don't think there's an alternative.
Theresa May's deal may be imperfect, but for business it comes with the potential of frictionless trade, even if her language on EU migrants not jumping the queue wasn't ideal.
It is clearly political language. So far, we've not come across any serious issues with recruitment.
But you have had, as you said earlier, people leaving.
We've had uncertainty amongst some of our European employees based in the UK and vice versa, and some of those have sought some certainty for themselves.
Sought some certainty for themselves. That's business speak for leaving the country. Much more of that, and Theresa May's newfound friendship with business, currently on the up, may very quickly come back down.
Siobhan Kennedy there. Well, with me now is the chairman of the business lobby group, the City UK, John McFarlane, who is also chairman of Barclays Bank. We'll hear from him in a moment. But first, to react to the CBI's backing of Theresa May's Brexit deal is the co-founder of Leave Means Leave, the entrepreneur Richard Tice. Welcome to you both. Let's start with you, Richard, then. So you heard that. The majority opinion in the CBI amongst your fellow businessmen seems to be back this deal. There's nothing better on the table, and if you don't back it, you get Jeremy Corbyn in government.
Oh, come on. Let's be clear. We all know in business that no deal is better than a bad deal. And this deal by the Prime Minister...
Is that really true, though?
Of course it's true. Of course it's true. Every business person knows that. And this is the worst deal ever in history, to pay £39 billion for nothing guaranteed in return. Let's remember, just over the weekend, 200 British entrepreneurs representing 45,000 staff, over £2 billion of sales, wrote to the newspapers confirming that actually we would be better to refuse this deal. I think the business community is as split as the general population. I think it's really important to remember 90% of British businesses don't export.
So you are prepared to see a no-deal scenario. This thing gets voted down in Parliament, which many people predict, and if the price of that is Jeremy Corbyn at number 10, you'll be happy with that.
Look, people are making the wrong analogy because it suits people like the CBI, the vested interests of multinationals. Let's just look at the CBI's track record. They rejected the Thatcher reforms. They said we should stay in the ERM. They said we had to join the euro, otherwise it'd be a disaster. They were advocates of Project Fear. Their track record in the last 40 years is woeful. They should be ignored. Listen to the entrepreneurs of the small and medium-sized businesses. They're the people who know.
But I'm talking about political reality. You're prepared to go on the record to say that you're very happy to see Jeremy Corbyn, if that's the risk of this...
No, you're drawing the wrong conclusion. Let's be very clear. What we need is leadership that is prepared to either negotiate a good deal or walk away. No deal, no problem, no money. We save £39 billion. We spend it back in the UK.
Right, but it looks as if the rebellion against Theresa May is going nowhere. So the leadership you have is the one you're going to get for the next few months.
Well, for the next few weeks, but I think it's very clear that Parliament will reject this deal, quite rightly, because it doesn't suit, frankly, Remainers or Leavers, and then we'll see what happens.
But it might suit you, for your kind of business, to, to be outside the customs union, to be, to have greater freedom. But for the majority of big businesses, for the majority of the city, as we just heard in the CBI conference, they want maximum continuity, and that's what this deal offers.
Businesses have had over 2 years to prepare, and the base case that everybody should have been working to is no deal, because that's the only thing people guarantee. Let's look at the city, right? The biggest threat to the city is not Brexit, it's MiFID II, which puts it at a serious disadvantage compared to Asia, compared to New York, which is the city's main competitors looking into the future. That's what people should be worried about, not Brexit.
So when the Prime Minister said today, very clearly, several times, we will be able to, to negotiate new trade arrangements with other countries outside the European Union and have our relationship with the customs union. Was she lying?
Anybody like me who has read the 585 pages...
Have you read them all?
I have, and I'm afraid to say she is lying. She's either not read it or she's lying to the British people and to the business community. It's not possible, given the constraints of the single customs territory that we will be forced to start in and then remain in a future political declaration, a new deal.
So I've not read the 585 pages, I'm sorry to say, but on which page does it say specifically that we won't be able to do that? That what the Prime Minister said today is an untruth?
Look, I don't know every single page. I haven't memorised it by heart. What I do know is that we will be trapped in a single customs territory, and the political declaration makes it crystal clear that the basis for a new free trade deal will be the starting point of the withdrawal agreement. And what that is in real language, in layman's terms, is we're starting and we will finish with a single customs territory.
OK, John McFarlane, have you read 585 pages of this deal?
No, I mean, I run very large organisations, and there are people who do that. I get the summary.
Shouldn't you have read it?
No,
I mean,
of course
why not? This is important stuff. This is about the future of the country.
One thing I've learned about the Brexit process is if you look at every nuance and every move, then you get confused. The best thing is to stand back from it, try and work out where this is going to end up and what's appropriate.
So, you know, as Richard Tice just said there's no point in having Brexit if you can't actually leave the customs union, if you're not free, you know, to make these trade arrangements around the world. The Prime Minister said today that was not the case. Do you agree with her?
As far as I'm concerned, the big issue here is what's the impact on the UK economy, and particularly the sector that I'm involved in. We've got £300 billion of revenues that are playing on this, partly to do with the impact of the UK economy, and about a quarter of that's related to the EU. What the markets are saying at the moment is there's a probability of a no-deal Brexit here. And the pound has come down. If it's in the last 5 years, it's been 170. It came from 140, it's 128. A lot of people have lost a lot of money in this process, and it's the uncertainty and the probability of a no-deal Brexit that's being priced in. The one thing about these opinions that are flying around, there aren't a lot of evidence to support any of these opinions, but what I can see is the markets are saying, you know, don't go there. Bank stock prices, but, you know, for example, are at two-year lows, and yet the earnings are rising, the returns are rising, and the values are falling.
But I tell you one thing
that's to do with this.
Sorry to interrupt. One thing that I found curious last week is that last week, which is an incredibly tumultuous, heady week, when, you know, commentators were hyperventilating about this, that, and the other, and quite a few politicians, the markets didn't react that much, did they? I mean, the pound went down by 1.5% to the dollar. Doesn't that tell you something? Doesn't that tell you that the markets are actually much more resilient here than perhaps public opinion or political intrigue would suggest?
Yeah, the markets are getting used to new information. But remember, it's fallen a lot already. And that's what you're seeing.
Right. But it is also very possible, given the parliamentary numbers, that we will end up with no deal, and again, the possibility of a general election and Jeremy Corbyn in number 10. I don't know if that's something that you welcome or not.
Well, it's been a long journey to get to this point. You know, remember, we had to negotiate an exit before we could even talk about the future relationship, which is what we're really interested in, is that future relationship. And that's been a very tough negotiation with the EU. We're leaving a club, can't retain all the benefits, but we can retain some. And therefore, the Prime Minister and others have tried to negotiate the best outcome possible here in the circumstances. It's not perfect, but at least it's a step forward.
But it might not get through Parliament. So if it doesn't get through Parliament, as seems likely, and we end up with no deal, what is the worst-case scenario for the City of London and indeed British business?
Let's give it a go. Let's put it to Parliament and see. There's no point.
You don't sound too alarmist then.
No. At the end of the day, even in a no-deal scenario, agreements will be found.
Exactly.
But better agreements are made in transactions, because we need a future relationship with the EU, whatever happens here, and this deal at least offers that.
I suspect you agree with each other, actually slightly more than you might think. I've got to leave it there. John McFarlane, Richard Tice, thanks for coming on the programme.
One other shadow Brexit Secretary, Keir Starmer, has been talking to Labour MPs tonight, telling them the party could try to bring down the government in an effort to stop a no-deal Brexit. Joining us now from the House of Commons is the Shadow Business Secretary, Rebecca Long-Bailey. Rebecca Long-Bailey, your leader was at the CBI today, and just now, Caroline Fairbairn, Director General of the CBI, has put out a pretty negative response. She said firms have made an offer to Labour to work with business in a new partnership to solve issues facing the UK. But from rigid employment rules to blunt public ownership, Labour's approach sounds more command and control than partnership. What do you say?
Well, we certainly have been working collaboratively with the CBI and indeed other business organisations, and we've got an awful lot of common ground on our industrial strategy, our investment in infrastructure, the creation of a national investment bank and regional development banks, and the other suite of support that we're offering to business. I mean, it'd be good to have a chat with Caroline to discuss what she means by rigid employment rights, because certainly workers' protections are not something that I would cast aside very easily. They're very important to the health and well-being of our our workforce, and as we know, valued employees are more productive employees, and that's something that, you know, through my conversations with the CBI, we certainly seem to be on the same page. So no doubt we'll get the detail from them in due course as to what their comments mean.
She's calling for collaboration based on the belief that enterprise is a force for good. Does Labour believe enterprise is a force for good?
No, we do believe that. I agree that quite fundamentally, and that's why we're trying to create a fertile business environment through our many industrial strategy related policies. But unfortunately, we're not having a fertile business environment created in the current Brexit situation that we find ourselves with the deal that Theresa May has put forward. It might offer some short-term comfort to businesses through the transition period, but certainly not the long-term certainty many of our businesses need.
Well, although there is clearly a mix of views at the CBI, it's pretty clear that most of them seem to support Mrs May's sort of approach, at least, rather than Mr Corbyn's.
Well, we understand why, you know, many in the business community are anxious, and as I said, you know, they've tentatively welcomed the provisions within the withdrawal agreement that provide for a transitional period. We've been calling for that as well. But beyond that, there's very little clarity on what our future relationship with the EU will look like. And remember, businesses don't just invest for 2 years. They invest for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. And if we're serious about really revitalising our industrial strategy and revitalising our communities, we've got to offer that long-term certainty. So what we want to see happen is for Theresa May, if she can't get this deal through Parliament, that certainly seems to be the case from the chaos we've seen over recent days, she needs to go back to the negotiating table and consider the comments that have been made by businesses who haven't been supportive of Theresa May's deal. Let's remember, you know, the head of KPMG stated that there was very little in the deal that offered comfort to businesses in the long term, and the head of Deloitte's Brexit department are advising businesses to plan for all scenarios, and that's not the situation that we should be in after 2 years of negotiation.
But at the end of the day, it looks as if people are beginning to become extremely impressed with the Prime Minister's capacity to survive this great onslaught. She has been pretty stoic in these last few days, and even you must admire her stamina.
Well, you know, as a strong woman, I certainly admire that. But what I don't admire is the deal that she's trying to push through, which, you know, fails her own ideological tests, never mind Labour's 6 tests that aim to put our economy and our communities first.
Well, thanks very much indeed, Rebecca Long-Bailey. Thank you very much for joining us.
What a day it promised to be. The hardline anti-Brexiteers, led by Jacob Rees-Mogg, were confident they'd get the 48 letters needed to trigger a vote of no confidence in Theresa May. This morning on the Today programme, one of the group, Simon Clarke, said this is absolutely the day at which we stand at the bar of history on this. Well, nothing happened. Then there was the breakfast cabal, the 5 cabinet ministers led by Andrea Leadsom and Michael Gove, convinced they could renegotiate the deal, and in record time too. They've been conspicuous by their silence. Meanwhile, Theresa May stepped away from Downing Street to address the CBI. The deal was hers to deliver, she made clear, and she would be in Brussels later this week to carry on finessing it. So where does the power lie tonight? And are we any closer to a vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister? Here's Nick Watt.
The letters have been dropping, but rather more slowly than the febrile atmosphere at Westminster would suggest. The Conservative Party is waiting and waiting to hear whether 48 Tory MPs have decided it is time for a vote of confidence in the Prime Minister. Theresa May knows she could be the first Conservative Prime Minister since Margaret Thatcher to face a formal challenge. For the moment, she is selling her Brexit plan.
It was never going to be easy or straightforward, and the final stage was always going to be the toughest. But we have in view a deal that will work for the UK, and let no one be in any doubt, I am determined to deliver it.
This afternoon, the Prime Minister faced a potentially dangerous moment when she hosted a group of senior Brexiteers. They were ready for a fight if she had cast aside their ideas on how to avoid a hard border in Northern Ireland.
Can we ask how it went in Devonshire?
I'll tell you later. Very good meeting then.
So there's progress.
No. There's always progress.
So they sounded, you know, reasonably encouraged.
The number 10 talks came as a 5-strong delegation of Brexiteer cabinet ministers appeared to be backing away from a confrontation with the Prime Minister. A meeting of the group, led by Andrea Leadsom, failed to materialise. She is keen for changes on the Northern Ireland backstop. Penny Mordaunt shares these concerns but wants to focus on securing a free vote in Parliament. And Michael Gove, Chris Grayling and Liam Fox also have deep concerns, but they want to give Theresa May space to develop a declaration on the UK's future relationship with the EU before Sunday's summit.
Are you happy tonight, Dr. Fox?
I'm always happy, you know that.
A Brexiteer who supports the Prime Minister is losing patience with fellow Leavers seeking to dislodge Theresa May.
Well, there's a lot of pettifoggery going on. I mean, this is just playground politics. It's playground bullying. My gang's bigger than your gang. We've heard these people claim to have 80, 100, 50, 60 MPs, and here we are several days later and they're still trying to limp towards this line of 48, actually engaging in this kind of going door to door, begging people to write letters. It's pathetic. It's not in the country's interest. It's certainly not in our political interest, and it's not what the public want.
One Tory who resigned last week said that writing a letter is a painful business.
I think one letter a week from me is enough for anybody, and last week's was very hard to write. It was a really sad thing to have to do, but by 3 a.m, having ploughed my way through quite a lot of that document, I was just so dismayed that this was what was being forwarded. I knew I couldn't, defend it, stand up and, come and talk to you and say, yes, I think the withdrawal agreement will do, because I don't.
There'll be relief in Downing Street that Theresa May has made it to the end of a potentially crunch day in one piece. But inside number 10, they are leaving nothing to chance. One cabinet minister told me, I assume the Brexiteers will tick over the line and there will be a confidence vote. If you're going to resort to the dark arts, you'd better get it right or you end up looking an idiot, this minister concluded. A rare and possibly brief respite today for Theresa May, but she'll be waiting out for any news about the letters.
Well, in a moment, we'll be talking to our business editor, Helen Thomas, about Theresa May's next move. But first, we're going to join Nick at Westminster, who has news of developments tonight with the DUP. Nick.
That's right, as I was saying, they're a breather for the Prime Minister as those Brexiteers struggle to get those 48 letters, but trouble from the DUP. They're meant to have a confidence and supply arrangement with the Conservatives, but they've abstained on a series of votes on the budget and, crucially, have sided with Labour on an amendment related to publishing child poverty targets. Well, look, I'm joined now by Sammy Wilson, who is the DUP's Brexit spokesman. Mr Wilson, can I ask you, that's a pretty hostile act tonight.
Well, first of all, it's a decision we took after a lot of thought and a lot of contemplation, because we have been extreme in honouring the agreement which we had with the government. We have saved domestic legislation on about 20% of the time and Brexit legislation on 50% of the votes. But tonight we took the view that since the government had broken one of the fundamental agreements which they had with us, namely that they would deliver Brexit for the people of the United Kingdom as a whole, and secondly, they would not separate Northern Ireland constitutionally or economically from the United Kingdom, that we had to do something to show our displeasure. And what we did tonight was we abstained in a number of votes. We voted with the Labour Party in one vote. None of them have financial consequences, by the way, but all of them were designed to send a political message to the government. Look, we've got an agreement with you, but you've got to keep your side of the bargain, otherwise we don't feel obliged to keep ours.
You say there are not financial consequences, but it's a confidence and supply arrangement, the crucial word being supply, which is any votes to do with money. This is the finance bill. You support them. That arrangement's over now, isn't it?
And the confidence supply arrangement also included promises that the government made about delivering Brexit. There were two sides to it. We would see the domestic legislation through the House of Commons, and they would also see the Brexit legislation through the House of Commons in the shape that the Prime Minister promised in her manifesto, in her Florence speech, and in the promises she made to us last December. She has broken all of those promises to the people of the United Kingdom, to our own party, and to the people of Northern Ireland. And therefore, the government really should be looking at its record and saying, what can we do to mend the fences which we've broken with so many people in this place?
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. So, Kirsty, a bit of a gloomy backdrop for Theresa May as she tries to build up for support for the one thing she can negotiate ahead of the EU summit on Sunday, that is the future trading relationship with the European Union.
Thanks very much. I'm just going to put that straight to Helen. Given the trouble with the DUP tonight, what's going to be her overriding concern when she heads for Brussels? What's she going to hope to get?
Well, I mean, when you think about where she might be able to make progress this week, you've got to think about what's realistic and also what might be helpful. And we're really talking, as Nick said, about the political declaration, so the 7-page document, not legally binding, so you have a bit more scope for manoeuvre. And what we're expecting is that will be really fleshed out. It could come out 3 times as long. And the overall tone would be more detailed, more credible, but also sort of more positive, more ambitious. Certain areas, so security is one area you could really see fleshed out around judicial cooperation, data sharing, maybe access to certain systems. I think economic partnership is a tough one. Would really like to see movement there, but ultimately, while the UK might like some aspiration of frictionless trade, the EU has been pretty clear that that's not on the table without being in the single market. And there are other areas that could be useful. For example, more detail on the timetable for negotiations, so a feeling that you can move quickly and hopefully avoid ever having to use the Irish backstop, which is obviously so controversial. The question is, does any of this movement shift any of those opposing groups into the yes column? And I think that remains quite doubtful.
And do you get any sense of the response?
The response from Europe? Well, as I say, I think there are some areas where it feels like movement is possible. Security, everyone's interests are more aligned. Economics and other areas much more difficult.
Helen, thanks very much indeed. Well, I'm joined now from Westminster by the Conservative MP Simon Clarke, and with me here in the studio is Sir Michael Rake, Chairman of BT for 10 years until last year. Good evening to you both. Simon Clarke, first of all, the famous words this morning in the Today programme, I thought we were standing at the bar of history. So what happened? You haven't got your 48 votes, 48 letters.
I think it is fair to say that process continues, and it must be said also that the judgment that will await from posterity if we do not ditch this deal will be damning. And so I don't take back those words. Obviously, I hope today would be the day. And this is something which I don't apologise for, because I profoundly believe that the deal which the Prime Minister is presenting is a great mistake and will be judged as such by those who look back on this.
Do you not actually think that people in the streets are just going to think you're self-serving here? And where is the appetite to pull Theresa May down?
Well, the truth is that this is not about the Prime Minister in that sense. Well, no, let me be clear. We have the utmost respect and regard for her diligence with which she's discharged her duties and the class and resilience she's shown. But the truth is that we've seen that the deal is not separable from her continuing in office, and that is a difficult truth to accept. It's one that colleagues, including myself, have really struggled with, but nonetheless, it is the truth.
Do you think that if you get to the end of the week and we don't see any sign of 48, it's game over?
Well, I think the real risk of game over is if the DUP...
No, I'm asking you, do you think
away.
If you're not going to get to the end of the week and get 48, it's game over?
No, I don't. No, I don't. I think the truth is there'll be other flashpoints. I think when the deal comes to the House of Commons, I think that could well be a flashpoint. I think, whilst it's possible that the government will be defeated, I also think there is the nightmare scenario that the government could win with Labour support. And I think that will be focusing minds in the run-up to that vote. Right. So I don't think this is the end. No, I don't.
Sir Michael Rake, from another perspective, you want another go at this, certainly not from the perspective of the ERG, but you actually want to have a second referendum. How on earth... this is big business talking now. How on earth is this going to unite the country?
Well, first of all, I think we need to understand that where business has always been on this, at the time of the referendum, even more so now, is that in our view it would have been economically in the interest of the country to have remained.
But you lost.
But, well, the referendum went in a direction and Parliament voted to start Article 50. So we'd hope for a pragmatic solution that would allow a close cooperation with the European Union, frictionless trade, on all of those issues that we think are so critical and which I think, as a compromise, the Prime Minister is trying to achieve.
So the idea of a customs union, a kind of never-ending customs union?
Well, not a never-ending customs union. I think, my personal view from the very beginning was that after 45 years in the European Union, with all the work gone to create the world's largest single market, it was essential to have a long transition period so we didn't damage the economy while we worked through the complexity of 50-plus trade treaties and 30-plus regulatory arrangements.
Tell me, Simon Clark, from your point of view, though, you'd be quite happy, wouldn't you, if you ended up with a no deal and you just went to WTO rules?
Well, the short answer is that's not ever been my preferred option, but I certainly think that if in the end it turns out to be a choice between this deal and no deal, then that's something which, I won't hesitate to do. I think that what we do need to see, obviously, is much more urgent government preparation for that scenario, because, of course, whatever I think, Parliament itself seems very unlikely to vote for this deal, and so that being so, we do need to prepare.
So then you will have to say to the people of Northern Ireland that under WTO rules, there will have to be checks on goods coming in from the EU to Northern Ireland.
Well, what we've heard today from Leo Varadkar is that there will not be, under any circumstances, a hard border, and given that we replicate that commitment on our side, I see no reason why that should happen. Indeed, that demonstrates precisely how the British government has been played on this issue. We have been led by the nose, and we've ended up conceding this dreadful backstop as a result.
So, Mark.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, the very worst possible option for this country would be no deal. I think it's very clear, and the vast majority of economists and business leaders would support that.
So you would support this deal rather than a no deal?
Well, no, I think, absolutely. So I think where I personally am is just to remember that this country is quite self-evidently divided. Parliament's divided. The two major political parties are divided. The Brexiteers are divided. And in these circumstances, I think, yes, it would be, in a way, good to get this voted through because it would eliminate the possibility of no deal. But I believe that at that point, given the divisions that exist in the country, why not go to the people and say the options here are what the Prime Minister and the government brought to you, or to remain. But
the people of the United Kingdom voted to take back control, and what you're saying is that that really is not paramount. As far as you're concerned, business will suffer, and you then say the economy would suffer. That takes precedence over control and sovereignty.
No, that's not what I'm saying. What I think is very clear, look, as a citizen, it's very clear to me that we had a referendum. 36% of the electorate voted to leave, in an irreversible decision. We have a general election every 5 years where people can change their minds. Whatever was said or not said at the time of the referendum, that's not an offer now, what was put forward. Why would you not go back in an area of incredible complexity and total divide in the country to put the option between what the government are offering and remain?
Tell me, that would be an anathema to you, Simon Clark.
It would be, indeed. I mean, that's just totally unacceptable. I think it shows the extent to which the business community has lost contact with areas like my own in Middlesbrough South and East Cleveland. It's clear to me there was a referendum mandate, we have to honour it, and if that means there isn't a deal, then we will leave without one.
Thank you both very much indeed.
So Ian Dunt and Melanie Phillips are here. Should we start with Brexit, the very latest, on the plot to oust Theresa May? To The Guardian then. It would lead to chaos.
Unlike what we have now.
Unlike what we have now, yes, quite.
This is Jeremy Hunt warning Tory rebels to back off effectively, yes?
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't seem like it needs to do that much warning because it doesn't look like they've got the numbers. So,
you can't get the staff.
Exactly, yeah, certainly. You just can't get the coups nowadays. So, look, I mean, they seem to be hovering around the 20s. They need 48. We were assured days ago that they already had 48. We were then assured, if Jacob Rees-Mogg comes out and says, as he did during the debate, look, I'm going to send in my letter, then the massed ranks of the ERG, the European Research Group of sort of extremist Tories on the backbenchers, would follow in behind him like there's a splendid army, and that is not the case. Well, actually, it's quite interesting, I think, after all these years of Jacob Rees-Mogg held up as this really decisive, pivotal figure on the Tory benches, that actually he finally pulled the trigger that he'd been threatening to pull for some time, and it turns out that the gun was full of blanks.
Yeah, but we don't actually know how many letters have been sent, do we? You're saying they're in the 20s of the ones we know about?
Of the ones we know about, but how many more days are we going to give these guys? I mean, look, maybe I'll be wrong, and in 2 days they'll have their 48
The
and it will all
momentum
happen.
is gone, there's no doubt about it.
I mean, this was last week. This should have happened by now if it was going to happen.
No, I agree. We don't know what's going on, but it looks as if the thing is fizzling as a coup. The question is, obviously, why it's fizzled. So obviously there's recriminations flying around that certain grandees and others have bottled it. So one can speculate as to reasons. So I think one of the main reasons is they're worried that if they trigger a no-confidence vote, that she will actually win it, and then she's safe for another 12 months.
Under the rules of the, contest.
Exactly, and that's something they want to avoid completely. Then I think there's the Boris effect. I think Boris is a one-man May protection unit, because the hatred of Boris exceeds even the hatred of Mrs May. And so, you know, the determination to stop him must weigh in their minds. And also, they haven't got... They are united about Brexit, you know, as Brexiteers, but they haven't got a leader that actually reflects, not just reflects, but can unite them. They're basically fighting each other like ferrets in a sack. It's the same old, Tory same old. You know, they all want to be top dog. And I'm afraid that's sort of, you know, overcoming their concept of the national interest.
But they started to talk last week about Boris and Gove, and Jacob Rees-Mogg would be offered Chancellor for it and all this sort of stuff. And, you know, who knows if ever...
But the other thing is, you know, one reads that they think that by keeping Mrs May in power, they can force her to renegotiate. And they must be out of their minds if they think that. First of all, she will never deviate, and the EU will never deviate. I mean, the EU, you know, has made it clear it will give no further. And I believe them, because the EU, in my view, was never going to negotiate a deal that was going to be to the benefit of Britain, because it's against all what the EU stands for. It cannot allow Britain to be competitive, to be free. It has to stop it.
I obviously don't agree with that last part, but it's certainly true that no negotiating partner at this stage in a negotiation, when you've both come out and announced the fact that the deal is done, then immediately goes back when some people say, well, we want some more stuff, because, of course, as soon as you do that, people would ask for more stuff and more stuff and more stuff. Of course, your negotiating partner, at the point that you sign off, you're on the same side of the table. You're no longer on different sides.
Exactly.
That was always going to be the case here. You know what's funny about this is everyone has hunkered back to their bunker, whether they're Brexit, Remain, or all the different factions within that, and they're wargaming what happens if she loses that first Commons vote. And all of this leadership stuff seems completely pointless to me right now.
Well, let's get to the Telegraph, because they're talking exactly that point. Brexiteer plotters fail to light the fuse, their headline. May faces down Eurosceptics as rebels fall short of the 48 letters, as we've mentioned.
Right. Well, do this. At the point that she loses that vote, then you might have a very good chance of getting rid of her, because, you know, she's demonstrably come to this appalling position where the one thing that she's been doing for the last 2 years, she has failed to be able to get past the Commons. And then, of course, all of these opportunities open up for different factions. Trying to do it now just looks like you're spoiled children, frankly, and I think they're seeing the effect of that.
There's another fact. There's another point. I mean, I seem to remember a time when a Prime Minister if she loses the vote, there was a time when a Prime Minister on a vote of significance, let alone a vote of this significance, would resign. What's happened to that?
Well, it's a minority government that's got more minority if the DUP is pulling its confidence and supply arrangement, which it seems to do tonight on a number of budget votes, certainly, which makes it even harder for her. Let's move on to the inside pages of the Daily Mail. May rejects Brussels' bid to keep EU rules for an extra 2 years in a business charm offensive. So you're obviously talking at the CBI today. She's made it clear, hasn't she? It's the double... Oh, it's the Express.
Express, yeah.
I apologise. It's the Express.
It's in both, yeah.
It's in both, yes. She obviously has insisted that she wants it all wrapped up before the next election, June 2022. Michel Barnier seems to be offering a transition deal could roll out until the end of 2022.
Yeah. I think it's really worth quoting her here, because it's another extraordinary statement from her in which almost every sentence of it is false. She said, if it were the case that there was a short period of time where we needed an interim arrangement, then the UK could choose whether it is the backstop or the extending of the implementation period. What she means by that, she always does this. She basically comes up against a problem. She just talks the most utter nonsense in order to get over the next week, the next month, the next short period of time to survive it, and then she deals with that later on. But what has been signed here, we discussed earlier how much time it would take to do this stuff and why you'd need a time extension and blah, blah, blah. They're saying until 2022. Now, the way this would operate is, first of all, you can extend transition. That takes you up to 2022, and then you'd have a backstop. Now, we are never, ever going to go for the backstop instead of the transition, because as soon as you do the backstop, you've got some protection in a customs union, but you're still going to take heavy fire there. You're not going to be able to export agri-foods. You're going to have checks on your products. Services would be completely cut off, so all of the passporting goes. You'd see a major effect on your economy that is not quite no deal, but just up from that. Her pretending that this would be a real choice is ridiculously unrealistic. Her pretending that any of this would be done by 2022 is completely unrealistic, and yet the same old regurgitated lies again and again.
Aren't we, in terms of how we produce our goods? We're very, you know, we follow all the same rules. So why?
We do. Well, actually, strangely enough, this would be one of the most complex trade negotiations of all time, because it would be the first one in human history where two partners have been working out how to become more distant from one another rather than get closer together. So most trade deals, you get together, you're like, these are the tariffs on potatoes. It's 8%, we'd rather it was 0, you put it down on cars, and then we get there. And it's basically horse trading on numbers, and it's really not that complicated. Shared regulatory space, which means shared decision-making processes and arbitration, are really hard to disentangle if you want to keep your trade the way it was in the first place. That's new, it's unusual, it'll be hard to do, and there's plenty of obstacles on either side of that time period that mean you wouldn't get it. Very briefly, at the end of the Canadian trade deal, it took 5 years to do, 2 years to ratify. Just to ratify it, we're giving ourselves 2 years in total to do the whole thing.
I mean, I have a slightly different set of concerns, which is this, that the whole business, the whole concept of a transition period, which keeps us tied to the EU, at least in the sort of negotiating framework, given the way the EU behave and given how craven we are, relative to, I think, the real situation, which is that the EU has much more to lose from this than we do. The transition period opens up the sort of almost indefinite possibility of us being led into further disadvantage. I don't agree that these deals, whatever they are so difficult. I'm not minimising for a moment. There would be difficulties. You cannot have a momentous disengagement of Britain coming out of the EU without serious problems and disadvantages and complications. I fully accept that. But nevertheless, we all are being told that, you know, there are these terrible disadvantages to us, but no one ever talks about the pain that the EU countries would face if they went down the path of punishing us. In other words, it is in their interests to make deals with us, not the EU negotiators, the individual countries. And consequently, difficult as it will be, I think that there is every prospect that, you know, bilateral deals will be done without too much pain, but not if it's under the umbrella of an ongoing fractious, manipulative transitional relationship.
I need to point out that there are no bilateral. I mean, you can only deal with the EU. You can't deal with the individual countries. And even then, I mean, the truth is, it's just under 10% of their exports go to us, and just under half of ours go to them. And so there's a basic quantitative problem of the fact that absolutely it's bad for them. It's just less bad for them than it is for us.
What's less bad for them?
They've only got 10% of their exports that come to the UK, whereas we export just under half of ours to them.
So obviously it's a more punishing experience for us, just in terms of scale.
I thought that the balance of trade was in our favour. They export more to us than we export to them.
Yes, exactly, yeah.
But isn't that the opposite of what you just said?
No. So in terms of the amount, the actual sort of slice of their trade that comes...
It's as a proportion.
Exactly, yeah.
Oh, so you're both right. There we go. That's lovely, isn't it?
That's not strictly true, but yeah, anyway.
Let's take a look at the eye as well. This limbo could last for another 4 years, which is exactly what we've been talking about, this transition period. A transition period with Brussels could remain in place until 2022. It all rolls on, doesn't it? Just very quickly before we take a break, what will happen, do you think?
You must be joking. You think we're going to answer that?
Did I ask that question so simply?
Her deal was almost certainly going to be voted down.
Will she stay? Sorry, yes.
Her deal is almost certainly going to be voted down the first time. Then very briefly, she always has this chance, and it looks like Downing Street's strategy is to go off, there'll be a market reaction, you do a tiny bit of face-saving renegotiation, you go back to the Commons, and they might pass it that time when they're staring no deal in the face.
Well, I think it rather more... that may be the case, but I think that what's being missed is the fury of the British people at the possibility that they will that they see this as an anti-democratic thing, that Parliament voted to give them the choice over this momentous thing about self-government. They made the choice, and now, one way or another, renegotiation, not renegotiation, second referendum, or Mrs May's deal, they'll be deprived of it. And I think that, you know, in political terms, ultimately, MPs are answerable to their constituents.
OK.